Hello and welcome back to another Gloo tutorial. In this video we're going to take a look at all of the dynamic tags that are found in Fluid Dynamic. Let's get into it. So in this video we're going to talk about Fluid Dynamic and the dynamic tags. So we have Dynamic Tag Everywhere, Taxonomy Terms Dynamic Tag, Global's Dynamic Tag, Dynamic HTML Attributes Repeater, Timespan Dynamic Tag, ACF Relationship Field Dynamic Tag, and finally Native Dynamic Tag Kit. So what we're going to do is work through each of these unique extensions and show you how each one really do elevate the Elementor experience. So the first dynamic tag that we're going to take a look at is a dynamic tag everywhere. Let me just explain what this does and we're going to jump into a real world example. So dynamic tag everywhere opens up the ability to add dynamic tags in every field that Elementor by default doesn't allow you to do. So as you may notice within Elementor, there are certain fields that allow you to fetch dynamic data. With dynamic tag everywhere enabled, this fills in the gaps and this will allow you to fetch dynamic information from anywhere across your website. So one example that I'm going to show you is we've created an options page using Jet Engine and we've just simply called this company details. Now this is fairly standard when you're building websites for your clients. So for instance, if you wanted to have some information globally set, we can fetch that information, we can build it in Elementor, and if the company or the client needs to change this information, instead of having to go into Elementor every single time, they can just simply change the information here and then that will reflect within the templates. Because we're setting that dynamically, there's no need to go back into the templates and adjust those fields at all. So if we just fill some information here, now if we save this information, what this is going to allow us to do when we jump into the template is be able to fetch this information. And the example that we're going to use is we're going to fetch the email address and we're going to dynamically populate the to field, whereas Elementor doesn't actually allow you to do that by default. So let's jump into the template and let's take a look and see how this works. So if we then place the form widget into view, if we scroll down to email, you'll notice now that we've got the dynamic tag option here. So because we created our option page using Jet Engine, if we scroll down to the Jet Engine area and look for option, now we can select one of the options available to us. So as mentioned, we're going to use the email address. And that is all we need to do. So by default, Elementor doesn't allow you to do this. But as mentioned before, to make this really easy for yourselves as a site administrator, or if it's a client that needs to update this information, by having this options page and the information set, there's no need for anybody to go into this template and update this. And if you had this saved as a global widget, of course, all of this information is already set, so you can just place this form across the website. And if you needed to update this email address, you wouldn't have to go through each and every page to set this information. It's just set in the options page and you can forget about it. So let's go ahead and update this, and that is all you need to do. So if we take this contact information a step further, so what we've gone ahead and done is to show you an example of this is we've included an additional meta field, which is contact email address on the regular posts for WordPress. So if we were to create a contact form widget within the post template, we can dynamically fetch this field as the field that we want to send the information to from that contact form. So if we go ahead and call this test post, and if we put a contact email address in of test@acme.com, and what we can do is have an email address for every single post from that specific contact form. So if it's a specific subject or category and that needs to be directed to a certain team or individual, we can send this information from here. And again, this is all front facing for yourself as a web administrator or a client, but this makes it far more flexible and far more dynamic. So let's go ahead and publish this. And what we're going to do is jump into the post template and just recap on exactly how this works. So if we go in and edit our post template, what we're going to do is the same thing as before, but this time we're going to fetch this dynamic field from the meta field and not the options page. So let's go ahead and take a look at the form widget once again. Now if we place that into our content below the post content, and if we go to the email option, And of course, we've got the dynamic tag. So again, what we're going to do is take a look at the meta field. So we're going to do jet engine custom field because that's how we created our meta field, and the field that we're going to take a look at. And we're going to take a look at the contact's email address because that's the meta field that we need to fetch this dynamic information from. So once that's set and we hit update, and every time that a post is created and that meta field is set, then every single post template could effectively have a different contact name based on the parameters set within the post. So as you can see, dynamic tags everywhere really does take Elementor to a completely new level. So giving you the ability to do things that are not even possible with Elementor or Elementor Pro. So as you can see, with dynamic tags everywhere enabled, you can fetch dynamic information from wherever you want and place it wherever you need to, because the fields are now available to you. So that wraps it up for dynamic tags everywhere. Let's move on to the next example. So if we now turn our attention to the Taxonomy Terms Dynamic Tag, what this allows us to do within a template such as your archive, it will allow us to output any of the taxonomy terms that we wish. So let's go ahead and take a look at this now. So with a heading widget, as an example, if we click on dynamic tags, scroll down to Gloo dynamic tags, and if we select taxonomy tags, we have some options to output any of the taxonomies that we want. So what we can take a look at is either categories, tags, or formats. And of course, if you have any custom taxonomies, these will be selectable here. So let's check out categories. We have some output formats, which are UL structure, OL structure, delimiter, array length, and specific array. So let's go through these one by one. So UL structure is just a standard unordered list. We have the OL structure, which is an ordered list. We have a delimiter, which we can then set the return value as either title, slug, ID, link, or clickable title. So if we click on title and we delimit by comma, so as you can see, it outputs the two terms available. So if we take a look at the other return values and take a look at slug, let's hit the comma, and of course the IDs, the link, and a combination of the clickable title. So this will be the title itself, but of course it is actually a link too. So the next option is array length. So the output of this is how many items are within that array. So of course we have 2 because we have 2 terms. And then finally we have specific array, and what this allows us to do is cherry pick any of the items from the array. And of course an array index begins with 0 and it returns back our first term. Of course if you select 1, it's the second term, and so on. So as you can see, this gives you total control and flexibility over which taxonomies and terms you want to show and where. So the next tag we're going to look at is the global dynamics tag. What this allows us to do is access the global information within Elementor, so where we set the global fonts or global colors. So let's go ahead and take a look within a widget to see what information we can fetch. So let's use the heading widget again. So if we use the dynamic tag, and if we scroll down to find global colors and global fonts, if we select global colors and click on global colors, as you can see, we can choose either primary, secondary, text, accent, or glue blue. And these are the colors that we've set as our global colors. Now if we select one of these, it'll return back the hex code. And what we can actually do is remove the pound or hash sign and just return back the code without that symbol. So let's take a look at the global fonts. So again, if we select dynamic tags and take a look at global fonts, click on global fonts, and again, if we click on style, we can either select primary, secondary, text, or accent. So let's click on primary, and this returns back the font family that's assigned to the primary option. Now there are some further options: responsive, return value, and the fallback family. Now these are actually best utilized when in conjunction with one of the other Gloo extensions. Now let's go and take a look at that now. I'd highly recommend taking a look at our other tutorial on Dynamic Composer Kit, because what we can do with the global dynamic tag is we can actually store this information in a variable and use it as dynamic CSS. So let's go ahead and look at the next extension. We have the native dynamic tag kit, which includes plugin dynamics tags, content dynamic tag, user tags, current URL tags, WP nonce tag, and the user role tag. So let's jump into our template and let's go and have a look. So again, if we use our heading widget, let's go ahead and take a look at dynamic tags and scroll all the way to the bottom. And what we're going to look at first is the plugins dynamic tag. Now what this tag allows us to do is fetch information about the currently installed plugins on this website. So if we select the plugin, this will give us a list of all the installed plugins. So if we select Elementor, and what we can do once this plugin is selected is actually return some information about that particular plugin. So things like the name, or the version, author, or description. So this might come in handy in some of your projects. So the next tag that we're going to take a look at is the context dynamic tag. What this allows us to do is fetch information about either current term, related terms, current post, current user, current author, queried user, and queried post author. So if we select current user, this returns back the name of the username, and of course we can select the user field, so we can select information such as nickname, email, username, related post, and meta field. Now these options come in real handy again when working in conjunction with other extensions from Gloo. So we can get information back from either the current term or related terms or current post. So we can really create dynamic websites. And again, I'd highly recommend going to take a look at the Dynamic Composer Kit video, where you can really see these in action. So let's move on to the next one. So the next option is going to be user tags. So again, let's remove this. If we select current user post IDs, so what this will allow us to do is return back IDs from post types such as posts, pages, media, landing pages, and so on. If we select posts, so this returns back the IDs of the post that this particular user has actually posted. And again, if we take a look at pages and media. So again, this is a really handy tool if you're doing any sort of dynamic visibility and you want to query these IDs. So if you wanted to include or exclude any of this information based on the ID or the current user. So let's go ahead and look at the next option, which is current URL tags. So again, if we remove this and take a look at this option, which is the current page URL. And of course, as you'd expect, this returns back the URL of the current page that we're looking at. So again, if you place this on any page, this widget would dynamically change per page that you look at. And of course, by clicking on this, you can either place some text before, after, or even a fallback if this widget failed to display any information. So the next option we're going to look at is the WP nonce tag. So what we're going to use this time is a button. So if we place this into view, so instead we're going to place this time the dynamic tag on the link. So if we scroll down and we take a look at WP nonce tag and take a look at the options in here. So what this will allow us to do is create a unique logout URL. So this is a safe and secure link that is generated by WordPress for security and to stop spamming of the website. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this URL actually looks like. So if we take our heading widget and if we replace this with the WP nonce tag, and if we just simply toggle logout URL on, and as you can see, it generates this URL. And of course, you can actually place in your own URL. So if we were to place in a link of our own, as you can see, it automatically adds the information at the end of the link. And of course, you can use a dynamic tag to pull in a link dynamically. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next option. So finally, we have the user role tag. So let's remove this information here and here and place our heading widget once again and select dynamic tags, and let's take a look at the user role tag. Now what this allows us to do is select either the current user, current author, or queried user. Now if we take a look at current user, which is the user that I'm logged in as, we can either return back the label or the value, and the output format again is either UL, OL, delimiter, array length, or specific array. So let's just take a look at the URL structure. And as you can see, this returns back the information about the current logged in user. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next dynamic tag. So the next dynamic tag that we're going to look at now is the time span dynamic tag. So if we jump into our post template, what we're going to do is use a heading widget, and we are going to select the time span dynamic tag. So let's go ahead and take a look at the options. We have the start date and start date format, end date and end date format, and the output of either seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, or custom. By default, the start date is current date, as is the end date. And what we're going to do here is output a string of the time difference between when the post was posted to the current date. So what we're going to do is set the start date to a dynamic tag, and we're going to take the post time. And if we leave the end date as current date, and if we take a look at the output options, let's select seconds for the moment. And as you can see, this just returns a value of how many seconds ago it was when we posted this particular post. And again, if we select minutes, hours, or days, what this will allow us to do if we select custom, this gives us a field to customize the output. So it's not just a static value, so we can create a string. For instance, this post was created, and if we use one of the variables supplied below, if we check out the hours, this post was created 7 hours ago. And of course you can use any of these variables. It's worth noting as well, if you notice any of your values coming out as a negative, it may be worth considering toggling always positive value on. So now that we've created this, go ahead and update. And if we take a look at this post on the front end, as you can see, this post was created 7 hours ago. So the next feature that we're going to take a look at within Fluid Dynamic is the Dynamic HTML Attributes Repeater extension. Let's dive in and take a look. If we select the Advanced tab, then scroll down and take a look at the Attributes option. Elementor does provide us the ability to add custom attributes to our widget. And of course you can actually add multiple custom attributes, keys and values. But the issue is it's static information and you can't fetch any dynamic data. So this is why we created dynamic attributes. And you may notice that we have this new option here. So if we go and select add item, what we can do is add a name, a key and a value. So for example, if we called this post title, and the key is going to be post title, we're going to select a dynamic value of post title. Let's go ahead and add another. So we'll call this one post ID, and the key is going to be post ID. Of course, the value is going to be the post ID. So let's hit update and take a look at what this looks like in the HTML. So let's preview the changes. And if we inspect this elements, as you can see in the HTML, we now have some custom attributes of post title and post ID, pulling back dynamic information. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this looks like with multiple values. So if we jump into dynamic attributes again and add a third item, let's call this service type. And the key is going to be service type. But this time we're going to use a dynamic tag, and then what we're going to choose is taxonomy tags. And if we select this option and we select service type, and the output form we're going to use this time is delimiter, and we're going to fetch back the ID. And what we want to do is the delimiter is going to be a space, because if we use a character such as a comma, it will break the HTML and not display this correctly. So let's go ahead and update this, and it will show that you can have multiple values per key. So let's do that now. So if we inspect the code again, as you can see, the service type is now returning back multiple IDs. So if we jump back and change this to title, we can see the actual names of these services. So let's do that now. So if we go back into the value, change ID to title, hit update. Let's take a look at this for the last time. Service type, service 1, service 2, service 3. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next dynamic tag. So if we now take a look at the ACF relationship field dynamic tag, and what this allows us to do is fetch back the posts that we have specifically assigned to either a post or a page. So let's take a look at the template and show you what this can do. So the first part that we're going to take a look at is the actual meta field that we created with ACF. So we've used the relationship meta field, and this allows us to select any post or page that we want associated with the post or page that we're working on. So our relationship meta field is called relationship, so that's important to keep a note of that. So we're actually going to use that as a reference point when we use the ACF relationship field tag. So as you can see, we've got a couple of posts here that we've associated with this particular page. Now if we go ahead and edit the template, as you can see there were 3 posts there. What we can do to output this information is use, for example, a heading widget. If we drag that into view, if we click on dynamic tags and scroll down to the ACF relation field tag, which is beneath the Gloo dynamic tags, and what we have is some options in here. Now, if you remember, I mentioned about keeping reference of the relation field key. So of course, our relationship is relationship. And what this will allow us to do now is fetch those posts or pages that we set within this particular page within that meta field. And the output format that we're going to choose is UL structure, and the return value if we set to name just for now. So as a basic example, you can see that these are the posts that we actually set within that meta field. Of course, you can change what is displayed here, and there are various different output formats and values. So if we take a look, we've got UL structure, OL structure, delimiter, and array length. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. So OL structure is a simple ordered list. Delimiter gives us some further options. So we've got a return value and the delimiter itself. So for example, if we wanted to output the names or the slugs, of course we do need to put a delimiter in. And what this does is obviously delimits the posts so that it can output each one that we've set. So as you can see, that is the slugs, and then we have IDs. This is great for debugging. And we have a link, which is obviously the actual link, the URL of that particular post or page that you've set. Clickable title. So this is a more elegant way, probably what you'd expect to see. So it's the actual post title or the page title, and then that's automatically got the link bound to this. So when a user clicks on this, it will take them to that particular page or post. And then of course you've got the meta field, and you can specify the meta key, and again you've got delimiter option there. So as you can see, this is a really nice way to have full control over where you want your posts or pages to show on specific pages or posts or templates, and it gives you the complete full control over this instead of having to cherry pick by IDs, using relationship fields or tags when using like related posts. So for instance, when you have to identify IDs of particular posts or pages, it's very difficult to control, whereas this gives you the complete control over which posts and pages you want to see and where. So as you can see, that was very straightforward and easy to do. So that just about covers it for all of the dynamic tags found in Fluid Dynamic. So thank you very much again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.